Yes.
so he can have some questions. I want you to introduce you to my cousin Margaret. If you have read the book, I came to them to Great Bend, Kansas. When I left Germany when I was 16, 17 years old. I got here to Great Bend, Kansas. My dad's oldest sister is her mother. So we're actually cousins. And I'm 93 and she's 90, going to be 91 shortly. She's at the nursing home in Ellsworth at the assisted living, but I take her to church with me every Sunday, so she gets out. And also my oldest daughter, my driver, when I go I don't drive out of town anymore, so my children said, Mom, you're 93, you don't get to drive to Great Bend or Salina. That's fine with me, as long as I can drive in Ellsworth. I'm so happy to be here. This map shows where my home was in Radach. It is now Poland. It is not Germany anymore. And we've been there. My husband took me there twice, and there's nothing of our farm standing. We lived outside of town. There's nothing but a white lilac bush and an apple tree. That's the only thing that was standing when we were there. I want to tell you that touched my heart when I went to Lyons, to the junior high school. 7th graders. I said to my Sunday school class, pray for me, I'm going to talk to 7th graders. Having raised 4 7th graders, you know, I thought they're going to go, lay their head down. There was none of that. That has to be the most fantastic teachers. There was none of that. Karen, my daughter, took 25 books. She says, Mom, I found out, she's working in Lyons for a lady, and she found out that the teacher was reading my book in a history class. And so Karen says, I'm going to buy 25 books and I'm going to give it to the school. And so they all could have a book, or sometimes 2 of them shared. And there's 30 in a class, and they have 2 classes. And when I told my Sunday school class, this is where I'm going to go, and I says, I'm really dreading that. Those are 7th graders. And I'm going to talk to them. Of course, they had read the book, and they had questions. They had the best questions ever. And they were the most well-behaved children I have ever seen. I was so impressed.
Yes.
You teach part-time there, don't you?
Yes, yes.
And I was so impressed with them. They asked good questions. They were so well-behaved. And I had 2 classes, 30, and then another class of 30 came. And for a gift, they gave me a box of blessings. It's like playing cards, 50 cards in the box. Scripture on front, and on the back, they all wrote a note. I'm carrying this in my pocket. This is practically worn out. I gotta make a new one. I was so impressed. This touched my heart. One of them said, you gave me hope. Think about that. These are 7th graders. You helped me trust again. 7th graders. You inspire me to be better. Your story touched us. I will tell my family about you. And one of the young men said, I didn't know I could like somebody I never met. They came, about 8 or so came around. at the end, and he says, and I want to give you a great big hug. And I says, and I give you a hug too. And that just touched my heart. I want to get to more schools. I like to tell them that this is real. This was real. This is not a story. This really happened when I was a young child. I was 15 years old when the Russians came into our home. My brother was 13, and I told them that my brother was actually about their age. What all he saw. We were moved. They made us leave. They told us you have to leave in 2 hours. The Germans were holding the line. They wouldn't let him into Berlin, and they said, we're going to move you. We're going to take you to Poland and Siberia. And they moved everyone out of the town out. We had 2 hours to get ready. What would you take, you young people? What would you take, you young ladies back then? What would you take in 2 hours? What would you take? Some clothes and you take some food. You don't think about a picture book. So all the pictures that are in this book, my mother had sent to Margaret's mother as we were children, when we were growing up. Otherwise, we would not have those pictures because everything was gone. Everything was gone that we owned, just what we were walking along. They said, you get out in 2 hours. 6 family belongings were on one wagon drawn by a horse. And so in other words, everybody had a suitcase. That's what we took with us, just a suitcase. And we're going along. We had grandparents. We didn't have, our grandparents had died before Russians came. We had grandparents that died. We saw them dying. They laid them in a ditch, covered them with a blanket or a coat, and they couldn't even tell them goodbye because they would say, go, go, hitting them with the butts of their guns, go, and babies. And that's what my brother saw. And his children said, and Mildred, our dad would never talk to us about this. We asked him a question, he changed the subject. Well, think about that. He was 13 years old, what he saw. He wanted to forget about this. 4 the young men were standing talking when the Russians first got there. They were 12 and 13 years old. They were talking. The Russian came up and shot one of the boys. And my brother standing there, all 4 of them, and one of them they shot. They shot this young man. They thought he was a Hitler Youth. They mistaken him for his brother who was 16. Well, Hitler Youth is like your Boy Scouts, only they had to wear the swastika. Everybody 16 years old had to join. So that was not willingly, it was a must. And you did not say one word against Hitler. My dad was in the United States. He came in 1922, and we left in 29. When I was 6 months old, we went back to Germany because my grandmother had died and my grandfather wanted my dad to take over the farm, and that's why we went back. My dad had nothing good to say about Hitler, but you could not say one word. You could not even talk to your neighbor. You could not talk because he might say, he said so-and-so. And they were watching my dad because he had been in the United States for 8 years. My dad did not like Hitler. I remember when they were trying to take Hitler's life, we had a radio on a stand, and my dad came in and he was bending over the radio listening. And I still see him standing there, and he said, they missed him again, they missed him again. Trying to get rid of him. Because we could do nothing. Our farms We had to give so much of our potatoes that we raised and rye, you had to give to the government. You had no say-so. He came, we had one of the Hitler man in a brown uniform, one of the Nazis, was living in our town of 600 people. And he came to us one afternoon, and he came in, my folks were working in the field, and I was in the yard, and she says, "Little girl, feed the chickens." And I said, "Well, we don't feed the chickens, we feed them toward evening so they can't come in to roost." They're running all over the farm, of course, up there. And he says, "Well, I want you to feed the chickens." And so I got the food and I started going, put, and they come running from all over but all he wanted to do was count the chickens. So he knew we were giving enough eggs to the government. Well, he didn't know my mother was smarter than that. She had a place where she had locked up about a dozen chickens in a hog pen. She had a place for chickens. So, but they would never go inside the buildings. They would always count what's outside. And therefore he wanted to know, but he didn't know there was chickens locked up. Well, my mother wanted some chickens for us to use and to butcher. So and we had the same thing, we had an extra hog in a chicken coop. So if they would have gone into the hog shed, they could count the hogs, but we needed that extra hog for butchering. We did not butcher beef, we just butchered hogs. We did not want chickens and ducks and geese. Now, I want to ask, is that someone has a question? Or Karen, do you think of anything else I should share? I could go on and on and on, but she tells me, "No, Mom."
How hard was it for you to go back after you'd been in the United States?
Well, I didn't know I was 6 months old.
Oh, okay. You
I had no say-so. No, I did not know I was an American citizen.
Yeah.
I knew I was born in America. I had an American name. Mildred is not a German name. Where my mom got that name, I know. Margaret and I talked about that. They had a neighbor lady, a friend of theirs was named Mildred, so evidently that's who I got named after. So my brother was born over there, of course, then 2 years later. So, but
Your dad not regret
it
going
was
back over?
hard for I'm sure it was hard for my dad. He was just being an obedient son, and for his dad, since he had lost his mom. But my mother did not want to go back. She said, "Then I have to wash on a washboard." And here they had washing machines. They lived with Margaret's folks. They farmed together, so that's where we lived. And Margaret's mom said, "Well, just leave the baby here, then we know you're going to come back." Well, they didn't want to do that. And so it was hard, probably hard, because life was easier here. Yeah. It was farming with horses, where they had machineries over here in the 20s already, so.
Now your mom got to come back to the United States, but did your dad ever make it back?
Oh no, the Russians took my dad when they were our cattle, where we live, do not get out to pasture. They are in a barn, tied with chains, and you feed them and you clean the stalls. They do not get outside like they do here. We had some pictures when my husband and I went over to Germany, showing our pictures in the pastures. "Oh no, you don't leave those little babies out there in the snow." And we said, "Oh yeah, they're out there." "Oh, you can't do that. You gotta put them in the barns." They were so concerned about the cattle out, what we were doing here. But now I got off track.
Your dad.
Oh, my dad, yes. And so the Russians took my dad to help herd cattle. Now what are any of you farmers? Okay. When you tie cattle up they're always tied up. How do you think they're gonna act when they get let loose?
You don't know
They
what to
didn't
do.
know where to go or what to do.
Yeah.
And here they got all these young men and boys and men to herd the cattle. They were getting them all together from the town. And they said my dad it would be 5 days that my dad would be doing this. Well, it was very cold, it was February, and my mother somehow got a scarf to him for his neck, that he put around his neck. And the last thing he said to her, keep the family together. Well, he never did come back. We waited and we waited and we didn't come back. The Russians never, ever, ever asked us our names, who we were. How did they know where he died or where he died? They did not know because they did never know his name. They lined us up when I was in a laundry camp. They lined us up in a long line and they said, you and you and you wash. That's how they just pointed to us. They never once asked my name, so I know they never asked my dad's name. And as far as being buried, my mother said, I wish Papa had died when we were home. Then I could have buried him. But they didn't even bury their own soldiers. My brother went and said, oh, Mutti, I'm going to have a pair of new shoes. I see them right there. They were sticking out. Well, there was a body in it. It was a soldier that was buried, and the shoes were sticking out. So you see how they scratched them under? That's probably how my dad got buried. No. Or just on top of the ground. And that's how the babies, we saw the babies, they laid them in the ditch and covered them in. It was just too cold for them. They could not be out like that. It was not a good time, but it was real. I want you to know it was real. And I want to forget about it.
One thing you mentioned at Lions was that when the Russians came, you were not able to bring any Bibles with you.
No.
And
no Bibles and no guns. Well, the guns were buried anyway, long before that. My dad had some guns and he buried them long before the Russians came, because we figured that would not be a good thing to have them. They think we might. But they said no Bibles. And so you find my mother sitting in a corner praying, or we would just sing some of the hymns we knew. That's what we were. That's the only way we had. Yes.
Was it only the Russians, or were the Germans ever a threat to you during your years back there?
The Germans, the Nazis were not good to us either. We had to do exactly what they wanted us to do. We could do nothing, and that's what made my dad kind of angry, but he couldn't say anything. My mother would say, Papa, don't say anything when you go to a meeting. Don't say anything, because you never know who's going to report you. And the Russians, and then the Poles came. When the war was over, 1st of May, they told us, you can go back home. So we loaded up our little wagon. It's like your red wagons, only has sides on it. That's all the belongings we had. And we had that little wagon and we pulled it. They told us we could go back home. The war is over, 1st of May. So when we got back home, there was nothing. the big hole in the roof of our house. And we went inside, they had made a laundry out of it, hardwood floors had holes in it where they poured the water down. A big hole under the window, they poured the water out like this, mold growing on the walls. And there, and all the furniture from every house, they put in a big pile. It was just like a big old junkyard, big old junk pile. We went to that pile to found us a mattress, a bed, something to sleep. We had nothing in our house. So when you go into a house, and every house was like this. Why did they do that? I don't know, but that's how it was. And so we went there and tried to find something that we could put in the house. But we couldn't be in the house because it was not livable at the time. So we went to town with one of our cousins and stayed with them, and during the day we would go back out to the farm. We were about like say quarter mile out we lived. But my dad had buried some papers before the Russians came. We have bricks in the basement. The floor was brick. And he took bricks up and buried this bag. Their marriage certificates, they were married in New York. Their marriage certificate, my birth certificate, some jewelry, which I still have, and money, which was no good. The money was not good anymore. And he buried that. And when we got back, Mutti said, she said, let's go down in a cellar, in a basement in the house, and look for that, if we can find that. We went down there, and there was a big pile of brick they had dug up. There was about 10 brick that weren't dug up. And she says, this is about where he buried it. I think they found it. She lifted the first brick, and there was the bag. You know that was divine intervention. The Lord looked after us. Thank you, Lord. Yes.
Did you and your mother get to stay together when you were with the Russians, when the Russians came and took you?
What?
Did you and your mother get to stay together when the Russians took you, you know, you were washing and stuff?
No.
They took your mother
I
somewhere
was
else?
taken.
Oh, you were taken.
My mother, she was so good, you know, I had a rosy complexion. And my mother, every morning, she was so afraid because they were taking ladies and girls and men to work for them. And she was so afraid, so she put lard on my neck every morning. She heated it, slapped that lard on it, and put a rag around my neck, and I would go like this. It's so tight. She made that on purpose. I couldn't turn my neck. On my face, I had a rosy complexion. On my face, she put flour. So I looked sick. And so they came in and they look at me and she says, don't touch her, she's sick. She did that on purpose. That morning, when they came in to get girls to wash, women, men, she hadn't got it done yet. And I was so happy to be without it that I could move. And that globule stuff on my neck, that's worse than Vicks. When I got here, and I had a cold.
Yeah.
Anyway, they came in and they just said, you, wash. And it was too late, she couldn't do anything. She hadn't got her makeup all
She hadn't
on.
camouflaged yet.
No, and so I want to tell you, we slept on bunks. No civilians in town. We slept on bunks. And then straw that was about this long. It was all crunchy. People had been there before us. They wear a crew out and then they get a new crew. And we were the new crew coming in. No civilians in town. And the girls all took the upper bunks. We thought we'd be safe up there. The older ladies took those bunks. We had a guard in front of the house with a gun, and he stood there. Why he was there, I don't know. To protect us, they said. But anyway, he stood there with a gun. The only way there was for us to wash ourselves was a trough outside the place with a pump and a water. You could pump and wash yourself. So I had a clean face and clean hands. That's it. For 3 weeks, no change of clothes, no comb. I had long hair. You just went like this. I can imagine what it looked like after 3 weeks. My hands were raw. These were not, you ladies, remember metal washboards? Any of you? Have you ever seen a metal washboard?
Yes.
Okay. These were wooden washboards. And they were sharp, much worse than this. You run your hand down it, they were brand new, wooden washboards. Never seen a wooden washboard. That's what we had in each big container. I've never washed a shirt before. Here I'm supposed to wash 100 shirts a day with Hitler soap, half the size of a piece of lava soap. We got, for food, we got potato soup for breakfast with rancid bacon. For lunch, it was mashed potatoes with rancid. I picked the bacon out. I never liked potato soup, but my mother's was cooked with milk. This was water. But I ate it because I was hungry. You eat anything when you're hungry. Even cooked grass is good. If you put a little bit, Mother would take a block of salt block and shave some of that the cattle lick on. She shaved some of that off and put in with grass. It was good. I don't know if I eat it today, but I ate it then because we were hungry. When we were 3 days in, my hands were raw, running down that washboard. They lined us up the 4th morning. I knew my dad was gone. I didn't know if I ever see my mother and brother again, so they told us if we refused to work, they shoot us, so the rest of them would not refuse. So I didn't care because I didn't know I'm hurting. I couldn't sleep. My hands were raw. And so she lined us up again and she said, she pointed to me, wash. I stepped out knowing I'm going to be shot. I stepped out and I says, in German, look at my hands. They hurt so bad I couldn't sleep all night. It's just like you have a burn or something. They hurt so bad and I had nothing to put on. Look at my hands. I'm not going to wash anymore. I shook my head like that and I thought right then and there, that's it. But she just pushed me back in a line and took the next girl. And she didn't speak up. Her hands were bad too, but I got to go plant potatoes. And I grew up planting potatoes. I was so happy to get to go out in the field to plant potatoes. Well, go ahead.
What was the time span from when when you went back until the Russians took your father?
When what?
From the time that you went back again in Germany, how long was it before the Russians took your father and you lost your farm?
The Russians took my father about 5 days after they got there. They took my father right away while they occupied, after they came.
I think he wants to know, after you moved back to
Sure.
Germany, how long was it before your dad was taken?
Oh no, my dad was gone already.
No, I mean, when your folks went back,
Yes,
from Great Bend, what was the time span before they?
in 1929, 45.
Okay,
The Russians came in 1945 and we went back they came back from America in 1929. So it'd be what, 15,
16 years. Yeah.
16 years?
Did the Germans ever come to your farm and did they take things from you too?
No,
The Germans didn't
No.
take things.
now the Poles, when they came, we were home 2 months. We were home 2 months and the Poles came in. 4 soldiers walked in and they said, we wondered why they were there. All at once there was Polish soldiers. They came in and they said, the Russians gave this, you saw the map, the Russians gave this land to us. You will become Polish citizens, speak Polish, and then you can stay here, otherwise you have to leave. I said, my mother is not feeling well. I think she was 47. I thought, all I can think of is stress. I don't know. She just trying to keep the family together, and she was not feeling well, and I said that to them. My mother is not feeling well, and so I don't think we can leave. And he said, I'll shoot her. Can you imagine somebody telling a 15 or 13-year-old they're going to shoot your mother? We didn't know what to think, and well, the other one just kind of hit him. He was kidding, of course, but that was not kidding to us.
Right.
And so the next day they came back and my mother says, we're leaving. The whole town left. We didn't stay. So that was the Poles, and they took over, and it's Poland now, so, and our farm is farmed by Poles, so. Anything else, Karen, I should say?
You pretty much hit a lot of the high parts.
I'm afraid these people are ready to eat. I don't
No.
Don't worry about it.
Arlen,
So the secret to being 93, we need to start eating grass, right?
what?
The secret to living to 93, we need to start eating grass.
He said the secret to being 93 is we all need to start eating grass. I would say, no, what is your secret for being healthy at 93?
Just keep going, and the Lord's been good to me. Every step of the way, I can see where He has protected us, guided me, kept me safe, and my brother and mother, and I did not, if you saw the book, the picture on the front cover, that is I saw my mother and brother for the first time in 6 years. I did not see them for 6 years. They were in Germany, I'm over here, trying to go to high school. Start when I was 18. Could speak no English or very little English. The only way I could make it was in Lorraine, where there were 8 of us in the class, freshman class. I was 18 years old when I started high school, and I finished when I was 22.
How did you end up from Great Bend to Lorraine?
And I worked in a diet kitchen. I told Margaret's mom and dad, You're talking German to me. I'm not learning English. She could not speak German. She and I couldn't talk together. But you know what she did? She was a junior in high school when I came. After school, she said, Mildred, come. And I would go with her. We dragged Maine in Great Bend. And then she'd take me for an ice cream cone. And I will never forget that. So now I'm sort of taking care of her. She calls me her mother. Because she's in a assisted living in Ellsworth, and I take her to church, I take her places.
Okay, so how did you end up from Great Bend to the Dublinskis?
Okay. When I was in Great Bend, I said, I gotta get a job. Get me a job where I can do the work and don't have to speak. I got a job in a diet kitchen at the Great Bend Hospital. And one morning, one of us had to always be early, cut grapefruit and get there early, set up trays. And it was my morning to get there early. The phone rings. Now what am I going to do? I had to answer it. There's nobody there. It's just me. So I'm answering it. It was 5 minutes, and the sister was down there, wondering what was going on in the diet kitchen. She came down there, and she told me what she needed, and we got it. And she wished me well. In the meantime, a nurse came down. She could speak German. And she did a little bit of translating, and the sister said to me, Mildred, you keep doing what you're doing. You're doing a good job, and learn English. And I promised her I would, and I did. And that's how I came from Great Bend, because that nurse graduated from Lorraine High School, and it was her English teacher that I went to live with for 4 years. She had married and had a little girl 4 years old and a little boy 2 years old. They took me into their home, and her grandmother said, Esther, have you lost your mind? You're taking in a foreign teenage girl. You don't know anything about her. But look how it turned out. I stayed there 4 years. And going to high school, oh, that was something else. Young man back there. We were in a tournament. They had a big, what do you call it?
Tournament bracket. It
Brackets
was a
of
basketball
tournament.
tournament.
Claflin, Hollywood, Bushton, Lorraine, and Bye. B-Y-E. And Mildred looks at this. While they all were looking at it, when they were going to play, I said, I feel so bad for that little town of Bye. I've never forgotten that. When one of those young men came back from California, he was a teacher, to take care of his dad's business at the bank at Lorraine, where I worked for 30 years. I said, Bob, of all the things you were telling me, or tried to tell me, how in the world can you be a teacher? He says, Mildred, I know what they're going to do before they do it, because I did it. So he made a good teacher, knew what they were going to do. But I had wonderful help. My home economics class, the 8 things you need in your sewing basket, I said to the teacher, 5 of the girls had written it down. She said, okay, the girls have written it down. I says, I know, I can tell you, but I can't write it. And she said, well, tell me. And I told her, she wrote it down for me. Now, where else could I get that kind of help? So that's how I made it through high school. Went 4 years, started working in a bank, and Mr. Meacham said, Mildred, I said, Mr. Meacham, do I have to take algebra and geometry? He says, yes, you have to have it to graduate. And so after I graduated, then I started working in the bank, and he said, Mildred, I don't know about you in the bank. I said, Mr. Meacham, I can add and I can subtract. And he would come every Monday morning to deposit the church money. And he says, I see you're doing it. And I says, I told you I would. I did the 4 years, and I'm 22 years old, and I told you I could do it, and I did it. And I was there 30 years. I think I want to leave you with this thought. I don't know what tomorrow brings, but I know who holds tomorrow. And I know who holds my hand. And I thank the Lord for that. Thank you for having me.